Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Captain JK, currently the captain on Boeing 787. Today I'd like to talk about the critical mistake I've ever made during flight for the last 26 years of my flying career. Let's get into what happened to me and why that happened. In 1998, it was when I was a brand new first officer on MD-80. MD-80 was one of the narrow-body airplanes which was made by McDonnell Douglas Company. Back then, it was flown all over the world like Boeing 737. I just can't forget the moment I saw the cockpit of it in the simulator. I was like, Jesus Christ, I'm dead. How am I supposed to fly this piece of shit? I mean, a piece of machine. Comparing it to the modern airplanes like Boeing 787 or Airbus 350, the MD-80 cockpit layout was so much more classic, analog-ish in a good way. You can see the difference between those airplanes. Anyway, one day in 1998, I was coming from somewhere in China. It was a kind of short flight, like an hour and a half flight time maybe, and something was started to go wrong just after entering Korean airspace from China. I didn't notice what was going to happen to us until it really happened. A few minutes after initial contact to Korean Air Traffic Controller, ATC, he asked us to turn right out of the blue. It was a kind of unusual instruction because we were still far from the airport. And since it was before Incheon Airport opened, we were heading to Gimpo Airport, Seoul instead. Anyway, to comply the instruction from ATC, I rotated a knob on the autopilot control panel. With the autopilot on, pilots manipulate the aircraft by pushing or turning switches on a panel called Mode Control Panel, MCP. It's a Boeing term for it, whereas Airbus guys call it FCU, Flight Control Unit. And the switch I rotated at the time was heading knob to make the airplane turning. I was flying the aircraft while the captain next to me was doing a pilot monitoring. Normally pilots fly in turn. I mean, both pilots can't fly the airplane at the same time. If a captain flew the first sector, the first officer will fly on the way back. Anyhow, as I rotated the heading knob, I was expecting it turning, but the airplane was not listening to me. It was not responding at all. I was like, what's going on? And I told the captain like, sir, it's not turning. Of course, I should have gone fly manually right away, but back then, it was a bit hard to do that, even though I was a pilot flying, PF. Most of the co-pilots in those days tend to be like dependent on the captains, especially a brand new pilots like me. As I told the captain, I expected him flying manually or telling me to do so, but let alone him flying manually. The captain called the ATC air traffic controller and said, our plane is not turning. From that moment on, things were getting out of hand because of the location we were at. As you can see the aeronautical chart, our position was very close to the prohibited area called P518. It was kind of like a buffer zone to prohibit the airplanes from penetrating into the North Korean airspace. By the captain saying that, the Air Traffic Control Authority was thinking that our plane was completely out of control, so that they declared temporary emergency alert in that area. All stations stand by. I felt that I had to do something right away because the captain was a bit panicking at the situation. I pushed the autopilot disconnect button and started to turn right manually and talked to the controller that we just started to make this airplane turning right. Finally, somehow, we were barely able to get back on the airway. It was revealed that we nearly hit the prohibited area. Then, what was the reason why we ended up in that situation? The problem was autopilot. It was disengaged sometime before entering the Korean airspace. Actually, the captain took off from an airport in China. Then during cruise, he wanted me to land at Gimpo Airport, Seoul. MD-80 had two independent autopilot systems. Because the captain took off, the autopilot was connected to system number 1. He could have left the autopilot as it was, but he disengaged it and reconnected to system number 2 during cruise at 31,000 feet. But the autopilot switch did not work properly. It actually tripped off instantaneously, and no warning message or no warning sound was triggered. And either the captain or I didn't notice that. Putting aside what the captain did at the time, as a co-pilot, I did not check the system thoroughly even after the captain did something strange and critical. And as a PF, pilot flying, I should have been more active and assertive. That was a very expensive lesson that I paid a lot for. I've learned a lot of things that I have to have as an airline pilot. 24 years have passed since then, but the moment is still clearly implanted in my brain.